Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her palms as she approached the firing line at Thunder Ridge Shooting Complex. The morning mist still clung to the valley below, but she could already feel the Nevada sun beginning to warm the concrete beneath her boots. Around her, dozens of serious-faced competitors were setting up their equipment for what many considered the most challenging long-range shooting competition in North America. At 28, Sarah looked nothing like what most people expected from someone about to attempt shots at distances that would make seasoned military snipers nervous. Her slight frame and quiet demeanor often led competitors to underestimate her, which was exactly how she preferred it. She worked as a software engineer for a tech company in Reno during the week, spending her evenings debugging code and attending virtual meetings. But weekends belonged to the rifle range. "First time at Thunder Ridge?" asked a gruff voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a man in his 50s wearing military surplus gear and a veteran's cap. His name tag read Mike Sullivan, retired Marine Scout sniper. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, continuing to unpack her custom rifle from its case. The weapon was a work of art, built piece by piece over 3 years. She had saved for months to afford the barrel alone, a precision-crafted piece of steel that could place bullets within half an inch of each other at 1,000 yards. Mike's expression shifted from casual interest to surprise as he watched her assemble the rifle with practiced efficiency. "That's some serious hardware you've got there. What kind of distances are you comfortable with?" "I train regularly out to 2,000 meters, Sarah said, not looking up from her scope adjustments. "Longest confirmed hit was 2,147 meters last month at the private range outside Carson City." The retired Marine raised his eyebrows. 2847? That's getting into serious territory. You military?" "No, sir, just weekend warrior stuff." Sarah finished her setup and glanced around at the other competitors. Most were men, many wearing military or law enforcement patches on their gear. She recognized several faces from other competitions, including Tom Harrison, a former Army Ranger who had won this event 3 years running. The Thunder Ridge competition was unique in the shooting world. Instead of standard targets at predetermined distances, competitors faced a series of increasingly difficult shots, culminating in what the organizers called the impossible shot, a target placed at a distance that changed each year, always pushing the boundaries of what civilian shooters thought possible. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcement over the complex's speaker system. "Welcome to Thunder Ridge 2024. Today's maximum distance target is placed at 3,532 meters. Weather conditions are light wind from the southwest at 3 to 5 miles per hour, temperature 72 degrees and rising, humidity at 18%. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. 3,532 meters was beyond anything she had attempted before. It was beyond what most people considered possible with civilian equipment. She pulled out her range cards and began calculating bullet drop, wind drift, and the dozens of other variables that would affect a shot at that distance. The competition worked in stages. Shooters started at 800 meters, then moved progressively to 1,200, 1,800, 2,400, and finally to the maximum distance. Only those who hit targets at each stage could advance. Sarah knew that typically fewer than 10% of competitors made it to the final stage. As the morning progressed, Sarah moved through the earlier distances with steady precision. Her shots weren't always perfect center hits, but they were consistent and well within the required scoring zones. Around her, she could hear the frustration of other competitors as they fell out of the running. Wind conditions were proving tricky, with subtle shifts that turned promising shots into near misses. By the time the group reached the 2,400-meter stage, only 12 shooters remained out of the original 63. Sarah studied the target through her spotting scope, a small white square that looked impossibly tiny against the brown hillside. The wind had picked up slightly, and she could see heat mirage starting to shimmer in the distance. She settled into her shooting position, controlling her breathing as she had practiced thousands of times. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, every control and adjustment as familiar as her own hands. Through the scope, she could see the target clearly despite the distance. She made a final wind adjustment and gradually increased pressure on the trigger. The rifle cracked, and the heavy bullet began its 3-second flight to the target. Sarah watched through her scope as the tiny white square suddenly sprouted a black mark near the center. A hit. "Nice shooting," said Mike Sullivan, who had been eliminated at the 1-800-meter stage, but stayed to watch the remaining competitors. "You're making it look easy." Sarah smiled but kept her focus on the task ahead. The final stage was unlike anything she had faced before. At 3,532 meters, she would be shooting at a distance where atmospheric conditions, the Earth's rotation, and even barometric pressure would significantly affect bullet trajectory. It was the kind of shot that required not just skill, but an almost scientific understanding of ballistics and environmental factors. Only 6 shooters remained for the final stage. Tom Harrison was among them, along with 2 former military snipers and a competitive shooting champion from Texas. The atmosphere had grown tense as spectators gathered to watch attempts at what many considered an impossible shot. The target at 3,532 meters was barely visible even through high-powered spotting scopes. Range officials had to point it out to competitors, describing its location relative to landmarks on the distant hillside. Sarah spent nearly 20 minutes studying the target area, taking careful notes about wind conditions at various points along the bullet's path. She was the 4th shooter to attempt the shot. The first 3 had all missed, their bullets disappearing into the hillside with no visible impact. As Sarah settled into position, she could feel the eyes of dozens of spectators on her. Several people had gathered specifically to watch this stage, including some who had driven hours just to see if anyone could make the shot. Through her scope, Sarah could barely make out the target as a tiny white dot. She had calculated that her bullet would take approximately 4.5 seconds to reach the target, dropping nearly 50 feet during its flight. A crosswind that was barely noticeable at her position could push the bullet several feet off target by the time it traveled over 2 miles. She made her final adjustments and began the slow, controlled breathing that preceded every shot. In her mind, she visualized the bullet's path, accounting for every variable she could measure and some she could only estimate. The rifle felt steady and sure beneath her. The trigger broke cleanly, and Sarah immediately lost sight of the target in the scope's recoil. She quickly reacquired the image and waited, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... "Hit!" came the shout from the spotting station. "We have a confirmed hit on the 3,532-meter target." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah remained in position for a moment, hardly believing what had happened. When she finally looked up from her scope, she found dozens of people staring at her with expressions of amazement and respect. Tom Harrison was the first to reach her, extending his hand with a genuine smile. "That was one hell of a shot," he said. "I've been shooting competitively for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that from a civilian shooter." As Sarah began to pack her equipment, she noticed a man in civilian clothes who hadn't been there during the earlier stages. He wore no military insignia, but something about his bearing suggested a military background. He spoke quietly with one of the range officials while occasionally glancing in her direction. The awards ceremony was a blur of handshakes and congratulations. Sarah received her trophy for the longest shot of the day, but she was more interested in getting home and processing what had happened. The shot at 3,532 meters had been a combination of skill, preparation, and a small amount of luck. She knew she might never replicate it exactly. As she loaded her gear into her truck, the man in civilian clothes approached. "Ms. Martinez, my name is Colonel James Patterson. I wonder if I might have a word with you." Sarah looked up from securing her rifle case. "I'm sorry, Colonel, but I don't think we've met." "No, ma'am, we haven't. But after what I witnessed today, I believe we should talk. I represent a special projects division within the Army. What you accomplished today, well, let's just say it's caught some important people's attention." "I'm not sure I understand, sir." Colonel Patterson smiled. That shot you made today? Our best military snipers train for months to attempt shots at that distance, and most never achieve that level of precision. You did it as a weekend hobby. That kind of natural ability combined with your obvious dedication to the craft is exactly what we're looking for. Sarah felt a mix of pride and confusion. Looking for what, exactly? Personnel for a classified precision shooting program. I can't say much here, but if you're interested, I'd like to arrange a more detailed conversation. The Army is always seeking individuals with exceptional abilities, regardless of their current civilian status. Sarah looked around the shooting complex, at the targets and equipment that had become such an important part of her life. The idea of taking her skills to a professional military level had never seriously occurred to her. She enjoyed the challenge and precision of competitive shooting, but military service was something entirely different. I appreciate the offer, Colonel, but I have a career, a life here in Nevada. I'm not sure the military would be a good fit. I understand your hesitation, and I respect that you have commitments here. But Ms. Martinez, what you demonstrated today represents a level of skill that could save lives in the right circumstances. We're not necessarily talking about enlisting as a regular soldier. There are other arrangements possible for individuals with your particular talents. The colonel handed her a business card. Think about it. Talk to your family if you need to, but don't dismiss the opportunity without at least hearing what we might be able to offer. The number on that card reaches me directly. As Sarah drove home through the Nevada desert, the colonel's words echoed in her mind. She had always thought of her shooting as a personal challenge, a way to push herself and master a difficult skill. The idea that it might have broader applications, that her weekend hobby could contribute to something larger than personal satisfaction, was both thrilling and intimidating. She thought about her job at the software company, the comfortable routine of her life, and the satisfaction she found in solving complex technical problems. Then she thought about the feeling of making that impossible shot, the moment when skill and preparation came together in perfect harmony to achieve something that most people would consider beyond human capability. By the time she reached her apartment, Sarah had made no decisions, but she had begun to ask questions she had never considered before. What would it mean to take her skills to the next level? What opportunities might exist that she had never imagined? And most importantly, was she ready to discover what she might be capable of if she stepped outside the comfortable boundaries of her current life? The business card sat on her kitchen table as she cleaned her rifle and put away her gear from the day's competition. The phone number seemed to represent a door to possibilities she had never seriously considered. Whether she would choose to walk through that door remained to be seen, but Sarah Martinez knew that her life had already begun to change in ways she was only beginning to understand. The shot at 3,532 meters had been just the beginning. Sarah stared at the business card for 3 days before making the call. During those 3 days, her life had continued its normal rhythm. She went to work, attended meetings about server architecture and database optimization, and helped her team debug a particularly stubborn piece of code. But in quiet moments, she found herself thinking about Colonel Patterson's words and the implications of what had happened at Thunder Ridge. The shooting community had already begun talking about her shot. Video footage from the competition was circulating online, and she had received dozens of messages from fellow shooters expressing amazement and asking for details about her setup and technique. Several shooting magazines had reached out for interviews, and an ammunition company had even offered her a sponsorship deal. But none of that attention carried the weight of the colonel's offer. Military service had never been part of Sarah's plan. She had chosen software engineering specifically because it offered the kind of intellectual challenges she enjoyed while maintaining a clear boundary between work and personal life. The idea of putting her shooting skills to use in life-and-death situations was both compelling and terrifying. On Thursday evening, she finally dialed the number on the card. "Patterson, came the crisp answer after just one ring. "Colonel Patterson, this is Sarah Martinez. We spoke at Thunder Ridge." "Ms. Martinez, thank you for calling. I was hoping to hear from you. Do you have time to talk?" "I have questions," Sarah said, settling into her kitchen chair, "starting with what exactly you meant by Special Projects Division." "Fair enough. What I can tell you over the phone is limited, but the basic concept is this. The Army occasionally encounters situations that require precision shooting capabilities beyond what our standard sniper training provides. We're talking about scenarios where a single shot at extreme range could prevent significant loss of life or accomplish objectives that would otherwise require much larger operations." Sarah absorbed this information. "And you think I might be qualified for that kind of work? Based on what I witnessed, you might be more than qualified. But qualification involves more than just shooting ability. We would need to evaluate your psychological profile, your ability to work under pressure, and your decision-making skills in high-stress situations. The shot you made at Thunder Ridge was impressive, but the military environment is entirely different from competitive shooting. What would the process look like if I were interested?" "Initially, a week-long evaluation at a secure facility. You would maintain your civilian status during this period, and you would be under no obligation to proceed further. Think of it as an extended job interview that also serves as a detailed assessment of your capabilities." Sarah found herself intrigued despite her reservations. "Where would this take place?" "A training facility in Colorado. You would work with some of our best instructors and be evaluated on everything from basic marksmanship under pressure to tactical decision-making. At the end of the week, we would have a clearer picture of whether this program would be a good fit for both of us. And if I decided to proceed after that week? Then we would discuss more specific arrangements. I want to be clear, Ms. Martinez. We're not necessarily talking about traditional military enlistment. For individuals with your skill level, there are other paths available. Contract positions, specialized consulting roles, arrangements that would allow you to maintain significant control over your civilian life." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "I need to think about this more." "Of course. But I should mention that this opportunity won't remain available indefinitely. The program I represent operates on a need basis, and those needs can change quickly. I'm not trying to pressure you, but I would encourage you not to wait too long to make a decision." After the call ended, Sarah found herself even more conflicted than before. The professional opportunities the colonel described were unlike anything she had imagined. The chance to use her skills in ways that could have real-world impact was appealing in a way that surprised her. Over the weekend, she drove out to her usual practice range, a private facility 40 miles outside Reno, where she could shoot at extended distances without interference. As she set up targets at various ranges, she found herself thinking about the difference between competition shooting and what the colonel had described. In competition, a missed shot meant a lost trophy or a disappointed personal goal. In the scenarios he had outlined, a missed shot could mean lost lives or failed missions. The pressure would be entirely different. But Sarah realized that the technical challenges might actually be greater than what she faced in competition. She spent the morning working on shots at 2,000 meters, using different weather conditions and various positions to challenge herself. Each successful hit reinforced her confidence in her abilities, but also made her more aware of the variables that could affect performance under stress. Her phone rang as she was packing up her equipment. "Sarah, this is Mike Sullivan from Thunder Ridge. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from the competition registry." "Not at all, Mike. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to follow up on something I noticed after your record shot. There was a man in civilian clothes asking questions about you. Military bearing, asking specific questions about your background and training. I thought you should know." Sarah felt a mix of concern and curiosity. "What kind of questions?" "Technical stuff, mostly. how long you'd been shooting competitively, whether you had any military background, what your training routine looked like. He also asked about your demeanor during the competition, whether you seemed nervous, how you handled pressure. Did he identify himself? Not to me directly, but I heard one of the range officials call him Colonel. Sarah, I don't want to overstep, but in my experience, when military personnel start asking detailed questions about a civilian shooter, it usually means they're evaluating that person for something specific. After Mike's call, Sarah realized that her shot at Thunder Ridge had attracted more attention than she had initially understood. The fact that military personnel were actively investigating her background suggested that Colonel Patterson's offer was part of a larger evaluation process that had already begun. That evening, she called her older brother Marcus, a career Air Force officer currently stationed in Germany. She had always valued his perspective on military matters, and she needed advice from someone who understood both the opportunities and the challenges of military service. "A sniper program?" Marcus said after she had explained the situation. "Sarah, that's not something they offer lightly. The military has excellent marksmanship training programs, but if they're recruiting civilian shooters for special projects, they're looking for abilities that go beyond what they can develop internally." What does that mean for me? It means they see something in your shooting that they consider exceptional. But it also means they're probably looking at applications that would be extremely demanding, both technically and psychologically. Special operations sniping isn't just about hitting targets at long range. It involves operating in hostile environments, making life-and-death decisions under pressure, and handling the psychological impact of that responsibility. Marcus paused before continuing. "But Sarah, if this is a legitimate offer from a real military program, it could also be an incredible opportunity to serve your country in a way that makes maximum use of your talents. The question you need to answer is whether you're ready for that level of responsibility and commitment." Over the following few days, Sarah found herself paying closer attention to news reports about military operations and international conflicts. She began to see how precision shooting capabilities might factor into complex tactical situations, and she started to understand why the military might value someone with her demonstrated abilities. She also began researching what information was publicly available about military sniper programs. Most of what she found was general recruitment information, but she discovered enough to understand that military sniping involved far more than just accurate shooting. Navigation, fieldcraft, intelligence gathering, and communication were all essential components of the job. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she didn't know about what Colonel Patterson was really offering. But she also began to feel a growing sense of curiosity about whether she could meet the challenges involved. On the following Thursday, exactly 1 week after her first conversation with Colonel Patterson, Sarah called him back. "Colonel, this is Sarah Martinez. I've been thinking about your offer. I'm glad to hear from you. Have you reached a decision? I'd like to know more about the evaluation week you mentioned. If I were to participate, what exactly would I be committing to? A week of your time and a willingness to be evaluated honestly on capabilities that go beyond pure marksmanship. Transportation and accommodation would be provided, and you would receive compensation for your time regardless of the outcome. The only commitment would be to maintain confidentiality about the specific details of what you experienced during that week." Sarah took a deep breath. "What would I need to do to arrange this?" "I can have travel arrangements made within 72 hours. The evaluation would take place at Fort Carson in Colorado. You would report on a Monday morning and complete the assessment by the following Friday. Are you interested in proceeding?" Sarah looked around her apartment, at the comfortable life she had built, and the routine that had served her well for several years. Then she thought about the feeling of making that impossible shot at Thunder Ridge and the possibility of using her skills for something larger than personal satisfaction. "Yes, Colonel, I'm interested." "Outstanding. I'll have someone contact you within 24 hours to arrange the details. Ms. Martinez, I want you to know that regardless of how the evaluation goes, your willingness to explore this opportunity speaks well of your character. Not everyone with your abilities would be willing to consider using them in service to their country. After ending the call, Sarah sat in her kitchen feeling a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She had committed to something that would take her far outside her comfort zone and into a world she knew almost nothing about. But she had also taken the first step toward discovering what she might be capable of if she was willing to push beyond the boundaries of her current life. She spent the evening researching Colorado weather patterns and making arrangements with her supervisor for a week of vacation time. The cover story would be simple, a specialized shooting workshop that might help with her competitive shooting goals. As she packed clothing suitable for outdoor training, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that single shot at Thunder Ridge. A moment of precision that had lasted less than 5 seconds was now leading her toward possibilities she had never imagined. The evaluation week would determine whether those possibilities could become reality, but Sarah was beginning to understand that the real question wasn't whether she was good enough for what the military had in mind. The question was whether she was ready to discover what she might become if she chose to embrace the challenge. The flight to Denver was smooth, but Sarah's nerves were anything but calm as she watched the Rocky Mountains grow larger through the airplane window. She had spent the weekend researching Fort Carson and trying to imagine what the next week would bring. But most of the information she found was general base information that told her nothing about what she would actually experience. A staff sergeant in dress uniform met her at the airport, professional but friendly, as he loaded her bags into a military vehicle. The drive to Fort Carson took just over an hour, giving Sarah time to observe the transition from civilian airport to military installation. Everything became more structured, more purposeful as they approached the base. "First time on a military installation, ma'am?" the staff sergeant asked as they passed through the main gate. "Yes, it is," Sarah replied, watching the guard procedures with interest. "You'll find it's different from civilian life, but most people adapt quickly. The folks you'll be working with this week are professionals. They'll treat you fairly if you give them your best effort." The accommodation was a simple room in what appeared to be officer guest quarters, clean and functional, but hardly luxurious. Sarah unpacked her civilian clothes and the limited personal gear she had been authorized to bring, then spent the evening reviewing the information packet that had been left on her desk. The schedule was demanding but not overwhelming. Each day would include physical fitness assessments, marksmanship evaluations under various conditions, tactical instruction, and what were described as scenario-based exercises. The packet made it clear that she would be evaluated constantly, not just during formal tests, but throughout every interaction and activity. Monday morning began at 500 hours with a physical fitness test that had been modified for her civilian status, but still challenged her adequately. Sarah had maintained good general fitness through regular hiking and gym workouts, but she quickly realized that military standard fitness was different from civilian fitness. The emphasis was on functional strength, endurance, and the ability to perform under stress rather than just general health. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior enlisted instructor for her evaluation, was a compact woman in her 40s with 23 years of military experience. Her manner was direct but not harsh as she explained the week's objectives. "Ms. Martinez, this week is designed to evaluate whether you have the potential to operate effectively in military environments that require precision shooting. That involves much more than just being able to hit targets. We need to assess your ability to function under pressure, your decision-making skills, your ability to learn military procedures quickly, and your psychological resilience." The first shooting evaluation took place at ranges Sarah recognized from her civilian experience, but with important differences. Instead of taking her time to set up perfect shots, She was required to engage targets quickly after receiving brief firing commands. Instead of shooting from comfortable, stable positions, she had to engage targets while wearing full military gear and sometimes immediately after physical exertion. The results were initially frustrating. Her first-day shooting scores were lower than her civilian competition standards, and she found herself struggling with equipment and procedures that were unfamiliar. But Master Sergeant Rodriguez seemed more interested in how she responded to the challenges than in her immediate performance. Civilian competitive shooting and military precision shooting are different skills, Rodriguez explained during the first day's debrief. Competition shooting is about achieving perfect precision under controlled conditions. Military shooting is about achieving sufficient precision under uncontrolled conditions while managing multiple other factors. Your basic marksmanship skills are excellent, but we need to see how quickly you can adapt those skills to military requirements. Tuesday brought more complex challenges. Sarah was introduced to military communication procedures and required to engage targets while maintaining radio contact with simulated command elements. She had to learn to operate as part of a team rather than as an individual competitor, taking directions and providing information while maintaining focus on her primary shooting responsibilities. The psychological evaluations were more subtle than she had expected. Instead of formal psychological tests, she found herself in scenarios that revealed her decision-making processes and stress responses. She was presented with simulated situations where she had to decide whether to take shots at targets that might represent hostile forces or innocent civilians. The scenarios were designed to test her judgment, her ability to function under moral pressure, and her capacity to make critical decisions quickly. Wednesday marked a turning point in her evaluation. The challenges became more complex, but Sarah began to feel more comfortable with military procedures and expectations. Her shooting scores improved as she learned to manage military equipment and techniques, and she started to appreciate the different mindset required for military operations. The day's final exercise was the most challenging yet. Sarah was taken to a remote part of the base where she had to navigate to a predetermined location using only basic land navigation skills she had learned that morning. Once there, she had to establish a concealed firing position and engage a series of targets at various ranges while maintaining communication with an observation team. The targets ranged from 800 to 2,400 meters, well within her capabilities under normal circumstances. But the combination of having to find the location independently, establish her position without being detected by roving instructors, and engage targets while managing communications and time pressure created a level of complexity she had never experienced. Sarah found herself drawing on skills and knowledge she hadn't realized she possessed. Her engineering background helped her analyze the tactical problems systematically, breaking down complex requirements into manageable components. Her competitive shooting experience provided the technical foundation for accurate fire, but she had to adapt those skills to military requirements that emphasized speed and flexibility over perfect precision. When she successfully engaged all targets within the allotted time frame, Master Sergeant Rodriguez's expression showed the first real approval Sarah had seen all week. "That was solid work, Martinez. You're starting to think like a soldier instead of just shooting like a competitor." Thursday brought the most intense challenges yet. Sarah was awakened at 0300 hours and informed that she would be participating in a simulated emergency response scenario. A hostage situation required immediate precision shooting support, and she would need to respond with minimal preparation time. The scenario was clearly artificial, but the stress was real. Sarah had to gather her equipment quickly, move to an unfamiliar location, receive a brief tactical briefing, and then engage targets that represented hostage takers while avoiding targets that represented hostages. The shots were challenging but manageable, but the pressure of working with a simulated tactical team and the knowledge that her decisions had simulated life and death consequences created a level of stress unlike anything she had experienced. She made all the required shots, but more importantly, She maintained clear thinking and good communication throughout the exercise. When it was over, she realized that she had functioned effectively in an environment that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. That evening, Sarah was summoned to a meeting with Colonel Patterson and two other officers she hadn't met before. The atmosphere was more formal than her previous interactions, and she sensed that this was a crucial moment in her evaluation. "Ms. Martinez," Colonel Patterson began, "you've completed 4 days of intensive evaluation, and tomorrow will be your final assessment. Before that happens, we want to give you a clearer picture of what we're offering and what would be expected if you choose to proceed." One of the other officers, a Major Chen, continued the briefing. "The program you're being evaluated for involves precision shooting support for special operations missions. These are typically situations where conventional military approaches either aren't feasible or would result in unacceptable risks. A precision shot from extreme range might allow the accomplishment of mission objectives with minimal overall risk." The third officer, Lieutenant Colonel Davis, leaned forward. "The work would involve deploying to various locations around the world, often with minimal notice. Missions might last anywhere from a few days to several weeks. You would typically work with small, highly trained teams, and your role would be critical to mission success." Sarah absorbed this information, beginning to understand the full scope of what was being offered. "What would my status be? Would I be a soldier?" "You would have a specialized contract position with significant autonomy," Colonel Patterson explained. "Think of it as being a civilian contractor with extensive military training and support. You would maintain your civilian status but receive military training, equipment, and compensation that reflects the critical nature of your role. The compensation," Major Chen added, "would be substantially higher than most civilian positions, reflecting both the specialized skills required and the risks involved." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "What would happen to my current life? My job, my apartment, my normal routine?" "That would depend on operational requirements," Lieutenant Colonel Davis replied. "There might be periods when you're deployed frequently, and other times when you're available for normal civilian activities. We would work with you to manage those transitions, but this position would require significant flexibility." Friday's final evaluation was the most comprehensive test Sarah had faced all week. She was presented with a complex scenario that required her to integrate everything she had learned. Navigation, communication, tactical decision-making, and precision shooting all had to come together in a single challenging exercise. The target was located 300 meters from her firing position, requiring a shot nearly as challenging as her record shot at Thunder Ridge. But this time, she had to find the target location using only coordinate information, establish her position without detection, and engage the target while maintaining communication with multiple team elements. The wind conditions were challenging, and the target was smaller than anything she had engaged during the week. But Sarah felt calm and focused as she made her final preparations. The week of intensive training had taught her to manage military procedures and equipment almost automatically, freeing her mind to focus on the precision shooting that was her primary skill. The shot was perfect, striking the center of the target with precision that impressed even the experienced military observers. But more than that, Sarah had demonstrated that she could integrate her exceptional shooting ability with military procedures and requirements. That afternoon, Colonel Patterson called her into his office for the final evaluation conference. "Ms. Martinez, you've completed one of the most challenging evaluation programs the military conducts. Your performance has been exceptional, not just in terms of shooting ability, but in your capacity to adapt to military requirements and function effectively under pressure." Sarah waited, sensing that a formal offer was coming. "We would like to offer you a position in our precision shooting program. The contract would be for an initial period of 3 years, with options for extension based on mutual agreement. Your base compensation would be $180,000 annually, plus mission bonuses, full medical benefits, and specialized training opportunities. The financial offer was more than double her current salary, but Sarah realized that the money was only one factor in a decision that would fundamentally change her life. "I need some time to think about this, Colonel." "Of course. Take the weekend. Let me know your decision by Monday morning." Sarah spent the weekend hiking in the Colorado mountains, thinking about the choice she faced. The military position offered challenges and opportunities she had never imagined, the chance to use her skills in ways that could have real impact, and financial security beyond anything her civilian career was likely to provide. But it also meant leaving behind the comfortable predictability of her current life and accepting responsibilities that came with genuine risk. The missions Colonel Patterson had described weren't just challenging technical problems. They involved situations where failure could mean lost lives, and where success required not just skill, but courage and judgment under extreme pressure. On Sunday evening, Sarah called her brother Marcus to discuss her decision. "Sarah, this sounds like an extraordinary opportunity," he said after she described the offer. "But it's also a commitment to a way of life that's fundamentally different from civilian existence. The question isn't whether you can do the job. It sounds like you've proven that. The question is whether you want to do the job, with all the responsibilities and risks that come with it." "I keep thinking about that shot at Thunder Ridge," Sarah replied. "For 5 years, I've been pushing myself to shoot more accurately, to hit more challenging targets, to solve more complex technical problems. But it was all just personal satisfaction. This would be using those same skills for something that matters to other people. That's a good reason to say yes. But make sure you're also prepared for what that kind of responsibility feels like. When your decisions and your performance directly affect other people's lives, it changes everything about how you approach your work." Monday morning, Sarah knocked on Colonel Patterson's office door with her decision made. "Colonel, I accept your offer." Colonel Patterson smiled and stood to shake her hand. "Outstanding. Welcome to the program, Ms. Martinez. I think you're going to discover capabilities you didn't know you had." As Sarah signed the contract documents that would change her life, she thought about the path that had led her to this moment. A single weekend competition shot had opened doors she had never imagined existed. Her hobby had become a profession. Her personal challenge had become service to her country. 6 months later, Sarah found herself on a hillside in Eastern Europe, providing precision shooting support for a mission that would rescue hostages and prevent a terrorist attack. The shot she needed to make was 2,800 meters through variable wind conditions, but she felt calm and confident as she prepared to fire. The skills she had developed over years of weekend competition had been transformed by military training into something larger and more significant. She was no longer just Sarah Martinez, weekend marksman. She was Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, precision shooting specialist, and her abilities served something greater than personal satisfaction. As she squeezed the trigger and sent her bullet toward its target, Sarah understood that sometimes a single shot could change everything, not just for the person taking it, but for everyone whose lives depended on its accuracy. It was a responsibility she had learned to embrace and a challenge that had made her into someone she had never imagined she could become. The shot was perfect, the mission was successful, and Sarah Martinez had found her true calling in the place where exceptional skill met the opportunity to serve. Her journey from weekend hobbyist to military specialist proved that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that take us furthest from where we thought we were going.